Dominic Callahan stood in the marble lobby of Hale and Associates, rain dripping from his janitorial uniform onto polished floors worth more than his entire year's salary. Across from him sat Victoria, immaculate in a navy Armani suit flanked by attorneys whose hourly rate exceeded what Dom earned in a week. The mahogany conference table stretched between them like a chasm 23 floors above Chicago's financial district, where people like him came only to clean up after people like her. Victoria's manicured nail tapped a single document across the wood grain. The sound echoed in the silence that followed. $50,000, Dominic. Or, I take Emma. The words arrived without inflection. A business proposition, no different from quarterly reports Victoria presented to Morrison Dynamics board. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, lightning cracked across the November skyline. Inside, Dom felt his world fracturing along similar jagged lines. Robert Sterling cleared his throat, the silver-haired attorney adjusting wire-rimmed glasses that caught overhead lights. His suit whispered old money with every movement wealth that transferred through generations rather than paychecks. Mr. Callahan, we're offering a generous settlement. Ms. Ashford assumes custody. You receive supervised visitation every other weekend. The pause stretched just long enough to feel calculated. Considering your financial situation, this represents your best possible outcome. Dom's hands tightened on the leather armrests, material supple beneath fingers, calloused from years of manual labor. Supervised, I've raised Emma alone for 3 years. Every breakfast, every homework assignment, every nightmare. He stopped himself. But Victoria's eyes had already narrowed. About what Dominic? Her mother? Leaving? Is that what you tell our daughter? The accusation landed like a physical blow. I don't poison Emma against you, even though you made it very easy to. Dom's jaw worked, searching for words that wouldn't make everything worse. Victoria leaned forward and, for just a moment, something flickered behind the professional mask. Not quite guilt, but its close cousin. Dominic. I've been building a career, creating stability, something you might understand if you had any ambition beyond mopping floors. The conference room door opened and a paralegal entered with coffee, the aroma rich and expensive. Victoria accepted a cup without looking at the woman. Dom declined with a shake of his head, unable to imagine consuming anything in this moment. Robert Sterling shuffled papers with practiced efficiency, each movement designed to demonstrate control. Emma sleeps on a sofa bed. Victoria's voice had shifted to something almost resembling concern. In a studio apartment that doesn't even have a proper bathroom door. Our daughter deserves a bedroom of her own, space to grow, a neighborhood where she doesn't have to step over needles in the hallway. That happened once. Dom's throat constricted. One time, and I reported it immediately. But even as he defended their home, doubt crept in like water through foundation cracks. Robert produced another folder, this one thicker. Ms. Ashford has documented concerns. Multiple instances of tardiness at school. Insufficient lunch account funds on 3 occasions. Homework assignments submitted late. He paused for effect. Testimony from school administrators indicating Emma sometimes arrives in clothes that aren't quite fresh. The bus was late. Twice because of accidents. Once because of weather. Dom heard defensiveness in his own voice and hated it. The lunch account was a bank error I corrected within 2 days. And Emma wore the same shirt 2 days in a row one time because it was her favorite Constellation shirt, and she insisted on wearing it for Space Week, even though it wasn't completely dry yet. Dominic, listen to yourself. Victoria's expression softened fractionally, a crack that sealed over almost immediately. You're making excuses for things that shouldn't happen. I've never been too exhausted to care for Emma. The words came out sharper than Dom intended. Every morning I wake at 5. I shower and dress without making noise so she can sleep until 6. When I wake her, she's grumpy because she's not a morning person, so I promise pancakes with chocolate chips. We eat breakfast together and she tells me about her dreams, usually about Mars or building space stations. At 7:30, we catch the bus holding hands because she still wants to hold my hand, Victoria. I drop her at schoolwork, my shift at Sacred Heart Hospital, and I'm waiting outside Sandburg Elementary at 3:15 every single day. Not most days, every day. The passion in his voice seemed to fill the conference room, pressing against acoustic tiles and floor-to-ceiling glass. Robert Sterling made a notation. Victoria studied her manicured nails, the 3-carat engagement ring from Preston Whitmore catching light. Mr. Callahan's sentiment is admirable. Robert's tone suggested otherwise. But the court will examine practical considerations. Ms. Ashford earns $420,000 annually. She can provide private education at Latin School of Chicago music instruction from Chicago Symphony professionals. Language tutoring, summer enrichment programs. His pen tapped the list. You work 80 hours per week across 2 minimum wage positions to earn approximately $38,000. The mathematics are quite clear. Emma doesn't need music lessons. Dom's voice had dropped to something quieter, more dangerous. She needs someone who knows that when she's quiet, really quiet, it means she's sad about something and needs to talk but doesn't know how to start. Someone who understands that her stuffed elephant, Mr. Buttons, has a loose left eye that can't be sewn because Emma says it's part of his personality. Someone who knows she ties his trunk in a knot when she's worried, and that's the signal to ask gentle questions and wait. You can't buy that knowledge. You earn it by being present for 3 years. Victoria's voice cut through the moment like a blade. 3 years you've struggled alone because I was building security. Now I'm offering Emma opportunities you cannot provide. Preston and I are getting married in June. We've purchased a home in Lincoln Park with a bedroom already prepared. Is your pride really worth denying our daughter that future? This isn't about pride. Dom could feel control slipping, edges worn thin by months of anxiety. This is about Emma knowing that when she wakes up scared, I'm there within 30 seconds. You taught her that people leave when things get hard. I'm teaching her the opposite. Victoria's face flushed, 2 spots of color appearing high on her cheekbones. How dare you? The door opened and Robert's associate whispered something in the senior attorney's ear. Robert nodded dismissively. Ms. Ashford, we should discuss timeline. Mr. Callahan has until Monday at 5 p.m. to decide. After that, we file the custody petition with Cook County Family Court. He turned to Dom, expression shifting to something almost sympathetic in its cruelty. I should inform you that custody battles typically cost between $20,000 and $50,000. Do you have legal representation? Dom thought of 7 phone calls that morning during his break at Sacred Heart, 7 different law firms, 7 variations of the same message, retainer fees ranging from $5,000 to $10,000. His savings account held $380. That was everything standing between Emma and catastrophe. I'll find representation. The lie tasted bitter but necessary. Robert exchanged a glance with Victoria that spoke volumes. Mr. Callahan, I strongly encourage you to consider Ms. Ashford's offer. He slid the final document across the table. This is voluntary termination of parental rights. If you sign, the transition can be managed smoothly, minimizing trauma for Emma. Dom's hands shook as he pulled the document closer. Legal language blurred before his eyes, but certain phrases emerged with brutal clarity. Hereby relinquish all legal rights, permanently and irrevocably. No further claim to custody, visitation, or decision-making authority. I'll never sign this. His voice came out rough, scraped, raw. You want a war? We'll have one. Victoria's mask finally cracked, revealing something that might have been pain beneath the polished surface. Dominic, please. Don't make this harder than it has to be. What's best for Emma is having a father who loves her, who's there, who knows her. Dom pushed back from the table chair legs, scraping imported tile. You can take me to court. You can bury me in legal fees. But I will never voluntarily give up my daughter. Never. He grabbed the document and walked out, leaving Victoria and her attorneys in the conference room, with its view of Chicago spreading below. The elevator ride down 23 floors felt like falling each descending number, a reminder of how far above his reality Victoria now lived. The lobby stretched before him in marble and modern art glory sculptures worth more than his apartment building. Outside November, rain hit like a slap. Dom had no umbrella, no coat adequate for Chicago's approaching winter. Water soaked through his uniform within seconds, running down his face in streams that might have been tears. But Dom couldn't cry. Not yet. Not while he still had to pick Emma up from Mrs. Brennan's apartment and pretend everything was fine. The bus stop was 3 blocks away, through streets that smelled of rain on concrete and exhaust. Dom walked with his head down, clutching the folder, detailing all the ways he was insufficient as a parent. Studio apartment, inadequate income, exhausting work schedule. Each phrase felt like a nail being driven through his worth. He thought about Emma that morning, how she'd insisted on making him breakfast, even though she'd burned the toast. She'd been so proud presenting him with charred bread and scrambled eggs that were simultaneously runny and overcooked. Dom had eaten every bite and told her it was delicious. The bus shelter offered minimal protection. Dom stood with other afternoon commuters, people returning from offices where they wore dry-clean-only clothing, and worried about quarterly reviews instead of whether their daughter would have heat through winter. He pulled out his phone with numb fingers and stared at the screen. 7:30 p.m. He had 2 hours before his overnight shift at Hutchinson Industries began. A sleek black limousine pulled up to the curb, water spraying from its tires. Dom barely registered the vehicle until the rear window lowered and a woman's voice cut through the rain. Dominic Callahan. It wasn't a question. The woman spoke his name with the certainty of someone accustomed to being correct. Dom bent down, squinting through rain at the car's darkened interior. The woman was in her early 60s, with steel-gray hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes that seemed to catalog everything at once. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" Dom's voice carried confusion laced with wariness. "Not yet." The woman's slight smile suggested that deficiency would be remedied shortly. "But I know you. Get in the car, Dominic. We need to talk." Dom glanced around, half convinced this was some elaborate prank. The other commuters were absorbed in their phones. "I'm not sure your daughter is Emma Rose Callahan, 7 years old. She wants to be an astronaut with NASA. Her favorite color is purple, but specifically nebula purple from space photographs." The woman leaned forward slightly. "You clean my offices every Tuesday and Thursday night. You've worked for my company for 2 years and you've never been late, never cut corners, never once failed to notice details that others miss." Dom's hand tightened on the wet folder. "I don't understand. How do you know about Emma? Get in the car and I'll explain everything." Victoria stood across the street through rain-blurred windows of a coffee shop. She'd seen the limousine pull up. She was watching now, expression shifting from confusion to something that looked almost like fear. The woman in the limousine followed Dom's gaze, and her smile widened fractionally. "That's your ex-wife, isn't it, Victoria Ashford, Senior Vice President at Morrison Dynamics? Very impressive resume." She paused meaningfully. "I'm Eleanor Hutchinson. I'm the CEO of Morrison Dynamics, which makes me your ex-wife's boss. And Dominic, I think it's time we discussed your future." The rain had stopped as abruptly as it began. Dom looked at Eleanor Hutchinson at the open car door at Victoria, watching from across the street. He thought about Emma and burned toast and Mr. Buttons with his knotted trunk. He thought about everything he stood to lose and everything he'd already sacrificed. The limousine's interior was warm and impossibly quiet, soundproofed to a degree that made Chicago traffic disappear. Leather seats molded to his body, and Dom became acutely aware he was dripping rainwater onto carpet worth more per square foot than his monthly rent. Eleanor sat across from him, perfectly composed, studying him with intensity that made his skin prickle. You're wondering why I know who you are. Eleanor's voice carried no warmth but also no malice, simply flat efficiency of someone stating observable facts. Among other thing, Dom managed his voice sounding strange in the hushed interior. I make it my business to know the people who work for my company. All of them. Eleanor reached for a panel and pressed a button. A small compartment opened, revealing bottles of water and towels. She handed one to Dom without ceremony. You're soaked through. Pneumonia won't help your custody case. Dom took the towel automatically, too stunned to do anything but follow her lead. I've been watching you for quite some time. 2 years and 3 months to be precise. Eleanor's gaze never wavered from his face. You sign checks from Premier Cleaning Services, not from me, but I pay attention to who comes into my buildings, especially people who have keys to every door. How did you— I saw you leave Hale & Associates. I saw your face. Eleanor's voice took on a quality Dom couldn't quite identify. And I know Victoria Ashford well enough to guess what conversation you just had. She tried to intimidate you into signing away parental rights. She offered $50,000 or threatened a legal battle you can't afford. Am I correct? His hands tightened on the damp towel. Yes. The limousine glided through traffic with smooth confidence, insulated from the city's chaos. Through tinted windows, Dom watched Chicago slide past in streams of color and motion. Why are you telling me this? The question came out rougher than Dom intended. Because 2 years ago you did something most people wouldn't have done. Eleanor's gaze remained steady. Do you remember the night of August 15th? Dom searched his memory, trying to pin down a specific date from the blur of identical overnight shifts. 2 years ago August, he'd been working at Morrison for only a few weeks then. You found a laptop in conference room 7B. Eleanor continued when his confusion became apparent. It had been left after a late meeting. Most cleaning staff would have turned it into building security. You did more than that. The memory surfaced slowly. The laptop had belonged to Dr. Patricia Chen. She'd been frantic on the phone explaining that it contained years of research data that hadn't been backed up. Dom had stayed an hour past his shift unpaid to make sure she could retrieve it that night. That was just common sense. The words came out defensive. The data was important. Common sense isn't common, especially at midnight when you're exhausted and have another job to get to. Eleanor's expression remained neutral, but something in her voice had shifted. Dr. Chen is one of our lead researchers in renewable energy storage. That laptop contained breakthrough algorithms that are now the basis for patents worth approximately $40 million. You saved her career that night, possibly the entire research division. I didn't know it was that important. No, you didn't. Which makes what you did even more remarkable. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. You didn't help because you knew there would be a reward. You helped because it was the right thing to do. That's not the only incident. 3 months later, you noticed a water leak and reported it immediately. The leak was coming from a pipe that would have burst within a week if it hadn't been caught, would have flooded our main server room. I just saw water where it shouldn't be. Last January, you found a security badge in the parking garage. Eleanor continued as if he hadn't spoken. You noticed it belonged to someone who'd been laid off 2 weeks earlier. You reported it as a potential security risk. That badge had been stolen. Someone was planning to use it for industrial espionage. Your attention to detail prevented a data breach that could have cost us millions. The limousine turned a corner, and through tinted windows, Dom caught a glimpse of Morrison Dynamics' main tower. 60 stories of glass and steel reaching toward gray clouds. He'd cleaned those offices for 2 years, never imagining that anyone noticed him beyond ensuring the trash was empty. I don't understand what any of this has to do with Emma. It has everything to do with Emma. Eleanor sat back, studying him with those keen eyes. I've been in business for 40 years. I've built Morrison Dynamics from a regional firm to a global corporation. In that time, I've learned to recognize character. Not the kind people put on for job interviews, but real character. The kind that shows up when no one important is watching. The driver came around and opened Dom's door before he could formulate a response. Cold air rushed in, cutting through his still damp clothes. Eleanor reached into her bag and produced a business card, heavy stock embossed with gold lettering. This is Rachel Winters. She's a family law attorney, one of the best in Illinois. She's expecting your call. I can't afford. Dom started, but Eleanor cut him off with a raised hand. You're not paying. I am. Consider it an investment in justice. Eleanor's tone left no room for argument. Rachel owes me a favor from 10 years ago when I was still on the bench. She'll represent you pro bono. And Dominic. Eleanor's expression hardened into something that could cut glass. Victoria may be my employee, but that doesn't mean she's right about this. I believe in merit. I believe people should be judged by their character, not by their bank balance. You've proven your character to me repeatedly. Now prove it to a judge. Dom stepped out of the limousine, his legs unsteady on pavement that felt too solid. The business card felt like it was burning a hole in his palm. Why would you do this? You don't even know me. I know enough. Eleanor's window began to rise. And Dominic. One more thing. Her smile was sharp enough to draw blood. Don't tell Victoria about this conversation. Not yet. Let her think she has you cornered. Arrogance makes people careless. The limousine pulled away, leaving Dom standing in front of Morrison Dynamics' gleaming tower with a business card and questions multiplying faster than he could process them. He looked up at the building, 60 stories reflecting clouds and sky. Somewhere up there, Victoria sat in her expensive office, probably convinced she'd already won. But she was wrong. Dom pulled out his phone and looked at the business card. Rachel Winters, attorney at law. The address was only 6 blocks away. He started walking, his mind racing through implications and possibilities. The law offices of Winters & Stern occupied the 14th floor of a smaller tower, elegant without Morrison Dynamics' ostentatious display of wealth. The receptionist looked up as Dom entered, taking in his damp janitorial uniform with a smile that only flickered for a fraction of a second. Mr. Callahan, Ms. Winters is expecting you. Please follow me. She led him down a hallway lined with diplomas and awards photographs of Rachel Winters with important-looking people. Dom's nervousness increased with every step. What was he doing here? Rachel Winters' office was a corner space with windows overlooking the city. She stood as Dom entered, a woman in her late 30s with dark brown hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that were already assessing him. Mr. Callahan, please sit down. Her voice carried warmth. Eleanor called me about 40 minutes ago. She gave me the basic outline. Why don't you start by telling me about Emma? Not the legal aspects. Just tell me about your daughter. It was the last thing Dom had expected. He fumbled for words, trying to organize 3 years of fatherhood into something coherent. Then he found himself talking, words spilling out about Emma's obsession with space and her determination to be an astronaut. About the way she organized her stuffed animals by size every night. About burned toast that morning and how proud she'd been. About Mr. Buttons and his loose left eye and the way Emma tied his trunk in a knot when worried. Rachel took notes, occasionally asking questions that seemed unrelated to custody law. What did Emma like for breakfast? What were her favorite subjects? What made her laugh? Dom found himself answering easily because these were details written in the fabric of his daily life. Good, Rachel said when Dom finally ran out of words. That's exactly what we need. Now tell me about Victoria. Dom hesitated, loyalty and honesty warring in his chest. She's not a bad person. She chose her career. When did she leave? When Emma was 18 months old. Victoria got offered a promotion requiring extensive international travel. Eventually, she just stopped coming back except for occasional visits. How often has she seen Emma in 3 years, maybe 11 times? Dom had timed Victoria's last visit without meaning to 47 minutes on Emma's birthday. Rachel made a note. Can you provide documentation? Photos, text messages. Anything establishing a pattern, I keep everything. Dom heard defensiveness in his voice. Photos, school records, medical appointments. Everything organized by year. I started after the first birthday party Victoria missed. I was afraid something like this might happen. That fear is about to become your greatest advantage. Rachel pulled out a fresh legal pad. Fear makes us careful, makes us document everything. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to show the court that stability isn't about money. It's about consistency, presence, being the parent who shows up. Victoria has lawyers. Dom's voice came out smaller than he intended. Robert Sterling and his team. They'll bury me in paperwork until I have no choice but to give up. So do you. Rachel's smile was sharp and professional. Eleanor Hutchinson doesn't do things halfway. And based on what she told me about you, I understand why she's doing this. You're not a charity case, Mr. Callahan. You're an investment. I don't understand the difference. Charity is giving something to someone who needs it. Rachel's voice was patient. Investment is giving something to someone who will do something valuable with it. Eleanor sees potential in you. Character. Integrity. Qualities rarer than you might think. She's investing in those qualities because she believes they're worth more than money. But what does she want from me? She wants you to be the father Emma needs. Rachel's response was immediate. She wants you to prove that character matters more than bank accounts, that working-class parents can be just as good, better, even than wealthy ones who outsource parenting. And she wants Victoria to understand that position and resources don't automatically translate to being right. The simplicity was almost harder to accept than if Eleanor had demanded something concrete. Dom looked around Rachel's office, taking in the Harvard law degree, the photographs with judges and politicians. We need to move fast. Rachel continued, checking her watch. Victoria gave you until Monday. That gives us 4 days to prepare. I'll need financial records proof of your relationship with Emma, documentation of Victoria's absence. Can you get me those things by tomorrow morning? I can bring everything tomorrow. Dom felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Hope. I keep it all organized in a file box. Perfect. We'll also need character witnesses, people who can speak to your parenting. Teachers, neighbors, anyone who's seen you with her regularly. Mrs. Brennan. She's my neighbor, 82, a retired teacher. She watches Emma sometimes. Dom's mind was cataloging potential witnesses. Ms. Patterson, Emma's teacher. Frank Morrison, he works security at Sacred Heart. Rachel wrote everything down. What about your financial situation? Dom swallowed hard. I make about $38,000 per year from both jobs. I have $380 in savings. My rent is $850 per month. I have credit card debt from Christmas and Emma's emergency room visit. My car needs new brakes. We're on a state health care program. He waited for pity or judgment. Instead, Rachel just nodded. That's actually better than I expected for your income level. It shows resourcefulness. The court won't penalize you for being working class, Mr. Callahan. What they will look at is whether Emma's basic needs are being met. And from everything you've described, they clearly are. Victoria will say she can give Emma more. More isn't always better. Rachel's response was immediate. A child doesn't need a 4-bedroom house. She needs a parent who knows her, who understands her fears and dreams, who shows up every day. We're going to tell Emma's story. Not Victoria's version where love equals dollars spent. The real story where love equals time invested. She paused. I don't take cases I don't think I can win. Eleanor was right to send you to me. I'm going to make sure Emma stays with her father. The certainty in her voice felt like a lifeline. Dom wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that the system could work in his favor for once. What happens if we lose? The question came out barely above a whisper. We don't lose. Rachel's eyes met his with steel behind the warmth. But if somehow we did, you'd have appeal options. However, let's focus on winning the first time. Go home, hug your daughter, collect those documents, get some rest if you can. We meet tomorrow at 9 a.m. to start building your case. And Dominic. Her voice softened. You're not alone in this anymore. Dom left the office building as evening settled over Chicago. His phone showed 6:15, just enough time to pick up Emma from Mrs. Brennan's before his overnight shift. The business card Eleanor had given him was still in his pocket, already softened at the edges from being clutched too tightly. Rachel Winter's card joined it, two small pieces of paper carrying more weight than their physical mass suggested. Mrs. Brennan's apartment was on the second floor, accessed through a hallway that smelled like decades of cooking and cleaning products. Emma's laugh filtered through the door before Dom even knocked. "Papa, you're early." Emma's face appeared with a grin that showed the space where her left lateral incisor had fallen out. "Mrs. Brennan and I made cookies." "Well, she made them. I mostly supervised and ate dough." "Supervised." Dom's voice came out rougher than intended, choked by emotion. "That's an important job." Mrs. Brennan appeared behind Emma Flower, dusting her cardigan. "Dominic, are you all right?" "Just a long day." Dom managed a smile that probably didn't reach his eyes. "I came to collect my assistant cookie supervisor." Emma grabbed her backpack and Mr. Buttons, who was sporting a trunk tied in a tight knot. She noticed Dom's gaze and untied it self-consciously. "Just practicing knots for Girl Scouts." The lie was transparent and terrible. Dom knelt to her level. "Hey, come here." Emma shuffled forward and he pulled her into a hug. "Everything's going to be okay. I promise. Is it about Mommy?" Emma's voice was muffled against his shoulder. "Kids at school said Mommy's going to take me away. Nobody is taking you anywhere. You're staying right here with me. That's a promise and Papa doesn't break promises." Emma nodded, wanting to believe him. "Okay, but Papa, if something did happen, would you still be my Papa?" The question hit harder than Robert Sterling's legal threats or Victoria's cold assessment of his inadequacy. Always. Forever. Nothing could ever change that. You're mine, and I'm yours, and that's how it stays. Understand? Emma hugged him again, fierce and tight. "I love you, Papa. Love you more, sweetheart." To Saturn's rings and back, they walked home hand in hand, Emma chattering about cookies and a math test she had Friday. Dom listened with half his attention, the other half planning for tomorrow's meeting with Rachel. He needed to organize documents, contact witnesses, figure out how to explain to Emma that they had a court date without scaring her. Their apartment felt smaller than usual after the spacious offices he'd visited, 850 square feet crowded with accumulated life. Emma's sofa bed was folded against the wall, her stuffed animals arranged in precise size order. Dom's mattress occupied one corner, separated by a bookshelf from Goodwill. The bathroom curtain, instead of a door, hung there like a flag of financial surrender. But it was home. Emma had never complained about the space or lack of her own room. She was happy here, safe here, loved here. Wasn't that worth more than Victoria's 4-bedroom house? Dom made dinner, while Emma did homework, their routine as familiar as breathing. Spaghetti again because it was cheap, and Emma never complained. She worked through math problems with focused concentration, occasionally asking for help. Dom helped where he could, his own education incomplete, after dropping out when Emma was born. At 7:30, they went through bedtime ritual unchanged for 5 years. Bath teeth pajamas with stars. 3 stories exactly, one about Mars colonization, one about dolphins, one from Captain Underpants that made Emma giggle. Sweet dreams. Emma rose. Dom kissed her forehead. "Love you to the moon and back. Love you to Saturn's rings and back, Papa." Emma clutched Mr. Buttons, the trunk loose now. "Papa, what if the kids at school are right?" "She won't." Dom's voice was firm despite uncertainty churning in his gut. "Because Papa's going to fight, and I always keep my promises. Remember that. No matter what happens, I'm fighting for us." "Okay, Papa." Emma's eyes were already drifting closed. "I'm not worried. You always make everything okay." Dom sat beside her until her breathing evened into sleep. The weight of her trust felt heavier than anything he'd ever carried. What if he couldn't protect this? What if Victoria's money was too much? At 8:45, he left the apartment, locking 3 deadbolts. The bus to Hutchinson Industries took 40 minutes through streets growing progressively emptier. Dom stared out the window at passing lights and tried to organize his thoughts. Tomorrow he would bring Rachel everything. Documents witnesses evidence of 3 years being Emma's father in every way that mattered. And somehow between shifts and preparing for court and making sure Emma never saw how scared he was, Dom would prove that love counted for more than money. The Hutchinson Industries Tower rose 60 stories into the night sky, windows lit in scattered patterns. Dom entered through the service entrance, nodding to the night security guard. He clocked in, collected his cart, and took the service elevator to the 20th floor. The offices stretched out in silent rows, desks and computers maintained for people who would return in the morning to jobs that paid enough for houses or vacations. Dom cleaned methodically, the work requiring just enough attention to prevent his mind from spiraling. Vacuum dust, empty trash, clean bathrooms, the same tasks he'd performed for 2 years, invisible labor that kept everything functioning. Eleanor Hutchinson had seen him. Really seen him, not just as hands that pushed a mop, but as a person with character worth investing in. At 3 a.m, Dom's phone buzzed. Rachel Winters. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Bring everything. We've got this. 3 sentences insufficient to counter the weight of everything at stake. But somehow, they helped. Dom finished his shift as dawn broke over Chicago, the sky lightening from black to gray to pale blue. He caught the early bus home, let himself into the apartment where Emma was still sleeping, and allowed himself to exactly 10 minutes to sit with his head in his hands. Then he got up, made coffee in the ancient Mr. Coffee machine, and began pulling out the documentation that would determine his daughter's future. 3 years of fatherhood reduced to paper and photographs, evidence that he'd been present when it mattered. Evidence that would have to be enough. Rachel's office at 9 the next morning felt less intimidating than Dom's first visit, though perhaps exhaustion was simply dulling his capacity for anxiety. He'd managed 3 hours of sleep after his shift, showered in water that never quite got hot enough, and dropped Emma at school with promises that everything was normal. The folder he carried contained 3 years of Emma's life, reduced to documentation, medical records, showing 24 doctor visits with Dom's signature, 0 with Victoria's, school reports with perfect attendance at conferences except Victoria's single appearance 20 minutes late, 15 minutes early, departure, photographs capturing birthday parties and park visits, a visual timeline of presence versus absence. Rachel spread the materials across her conference table with the precision of someone building a legal fortress from paper and precedent. This is excellent. Her approval carried professional assessment rather than empty encouragement. Every piece tells the same story, consistent involvement versus sporadic engagement. She created categories with her pen, moving across a fresh legal pad. What about Emma's extracurricular activities? She doesn't have any. Dom felt the admission land like a confession. We can't afford music lessons or sports leagues. Sometimes we go to the library on Saturdays because it's free. Rachel looked up, expression shifting into something fiercer. That's perfect. Don't apologize. Victoria will present expensive opportunities as advantages. We counter with meaningful engagement. Library trips where you actually participate versus hired tutors doing the work. Quality over quantity. The next 4 days blurred into preparation, consuming every hour. Dom wasn't working or caring for Emma. Tuesday morning, Rachel drilled him on potential questions, playing Robert Sterling with unsettling accuracy. Her voice took on the condescending edge of someone accustomed to winning through superior resources. Mr. Callahan, your daughter sleeps on a sofa bed that converts each morning. Do you consider that adequate? Dom stumbled through his first answer, defensive and apologetic. Rachel cut him off with a raised hand. Wrong. You're justifying poverty. Instead, emphasize what Emma has: private space with a curtain defining her area, routine, providing consistency. A father who ensures she sleeps safely. Turn their attack into your strength. They practiced for 3 hours until Dom's responses flowed without hesitation, transforming weaknesses into evidence of creative problem solving. Rachel pushed harder each time, finding new angles until Dom could counter instinctively. When she finally called a break, his shirt was damp with sweat despite the office's climate control. Better. Rachel's smile suggested satisfaction with progress rather than completion. You're thinking like a father instead of a defendant. That's what the judge needs to see. Mrs. Dorothy Brennan arrived at 2 o'clock, moving with the careful deliberation of 82 years carried with dignity. She wore a navy dress and pearls that had probably been her teaching uniform for decades. Ms. Winters, I presume. I taught English literature for 40 years. I know how to tell a story effectively. Rachel's professional warmth thawed into genuine respect. Then let's discuss the story we're telling. Mrs. Brennan, describe your relationship with Dominic and Emma. The older woman settled into her chair with classroom authority posture. Dominic moved into our building 3 years ago, shortly after his wife left. I knew immediately he was struggling, young father working 2 jobs trying to manage childcare. I offered to watch Emma during his evening shifts. Not as business, though. Dominic always tries to pay me something. As a neighbor, helping a neighbor. What have you observed about Dominic as a father? Mrs. Brennan's expression softened into something maternal. He's exhausted constantly, works himself to the bone. But I've never once seen him lose patience with Emma. Not when she's difficult about bedtime or fussy about food or testing boundaries the way 7-year-olds do. She paused, choosing words with precision. Last Christmas, Emma wanted a telescope. Not a toy, a real one for amateur astronomy. Dominic worked extra shifts for 2 months, barely slept. Christmas morning, when Emma opened that gift, Dominic didn't look at the telescope. He watched his daughter's face light up. That's what parenting looks like. Rachel made notes, expression revealing nothing. Robert Sterling will argue you're too old to provide adequate childcare, that you might fall asleep or be unable to respond to emergencies. Mrs. Brennan's eyes flashed with steel. I taught high school for 4 decades. I've handled everything from student fights to medical emergencies to parents threatening legal action over grades. I know Emma's medical history better than most pediatricians. Her allergies, seasonal, nothing serious. Her doctor's name, Dr. Patricia Morrison at Sacred Heart Pediatrics. Her emergency contacts, her medication schedule when she had strep throat, her anxiety triggers. I'm old, Ms. Winters, not incompetent. There's a difference. Ms. Laura Patterson arrived 30 minutes later, a woman in her mid-40s with practical clothing and sensible shoes of someone managing second graders. She carried a folder of her own. I brought everything I thought might help. Her Midwestern accent carried flat vowels of Illinois farm country. Rachel flipped through documents with increasing satisfaction. Emma's grades are excellent. Behavior marks all positive. No indicators of neglect. She's one of my best students. Ms. Patterson's professional assessment carried conviction that couldn't be faked. Bright, curious, well-socialized. She works well with other children and shows particular aptitude for mathematics and science. Her space obsession is age-appropriate and actually beneficial. It drives her to read above grade level. Tell me about Dominic's involvement. He's never missed a parent-teacher conference. Always arrives prepared with questions about Emma's progress. Ms. Patterson pulled out attendance records. Ms. Ashford attended 1 conference in 3 years. Late, took 2 phone calls during our 20-minute meeting, left without implementing any suggestions I made. Did Emma ever arrive at school inappropriately dressed or showing signs of inadequate care? Once. Ms. Patterson's honesty was refreshing. Emma wore the same Constellation shirt 2 days in a row. When I gently asked, Emma explained it was Space Week and the shirt was her favorite, and it had been wet that morning, but she insisted on wearing it anyway. She didn't seem distressed, just enthusiastic. When I mentioned it to Mr. Callahan at pickup, he explained the situation and apologized. Next day, Emma wore a different shirt and seemed completely unbothered. That's important context. Rachel's approval was evident. Robert Sterling will try to use that shirt as evidence of neglect. You've just provided the actual explanation demonstrating parental responsiveness rather than inadequacy. Frank Morrison arrived last, still in his Sacred Heart Hospital security uniform from the day shift. Ex-Marine bearing was evident in his posture and economy of movements. He shook Rachel's hand with controlled strength. I've known Dom for 2 years. Good man. Dedicated father. His assessment came in short, declarative sentences suggesting someone accustomed to distilling complex situations into actionable intelligence. Rachel guided him through potential testimony, extracting stories illustrating Dom's character. Frank described a snow day when schools closed, but the hospital remained open. Dom brought Emma to work, set her up in the employee break room with homework and library books checked on her every 30 minutes between cafeteria duties. She was quiet and well-behaved for 7 hours. Most kids that age would have been disruptive, but Emma knew her papa was working and she needed to be responsible. That's parenting. What's your assessment of Mr. Callahan's fitness as a parent? Frank didn't hesitate. Best single parent I've encountered. He's not perfect. Nobody is. But he's present. Emma adores him and he protects her fiercely while also teaching her independence. If I had to trust someone with a kid, Dom would be top of my list. Wednesday morning. Rachel filed the response to Victoria's custody petition, transforming 4 days of preparation into legal arguments supported by exhibits and witness statements. She walked Dom through each section, explaining how the law balanced parental rights against child welfare. Illinois courts use the best interest standard. That means we need to show Emma's emotional, educational, and physical needs are being met adequately with you, and that disrupting her current situation would harm her development more than any material advantages Victoria can provide. How do we prove emotional needs are met? Dom's question revealed core anxiety beneath preparation. Victoria can prove financial advantages with bank statements. How do I prove love? Through the signals. Only you know. Rachel's answer came immediately. The Mr. Button's trunk-knotting behavior, the 3-story bedtime ritual, the nebula purple preference. These are details demonstrating deep knowledge of Emma's internal life. They're proof of attentiveness no amount of money can purchase. Thursday evening, Dom sat Emma down after dinner with carefully rehearsed explanation. Tomorrow, Papa has an important meeting. Mrs. Brennan will pick you up from school. It's about adult business that's very boring but necessary. Emma's eyes narrowed with suspicion of a child who knew when adults were concealing information. Is it about Mommy wanting me to live with her? The directness startled Dom into honesty. Yes, but Papa is handling it. You don't need to worry. Kids at school say if you're poor, the judge always picks the rich parent. Emma's voice carried flat effect of someone repeating information without fully understanding implications. They say money is more important than love. Dom knelt to Emma's level, gripping her shoulders gently. Listen to me. Judges are supposed to pick what's best for children, not what's richest. And what's best for you is staying with Papa, who knows you and loves you and will always be here. Money can't buy what we have, Emma. Remember that. Okay, Papa. But uncertainty in her voice suggested she was reserving judgment. Friday morning arrived with inevitability of a deadline long anticipated and desperately dreaded. Dom wore the single suit he owned, purchased at Goodwill 3 years ago and maintained with obsessive care. Mrs. Brennan had pressed it the night before. He met Rachel in the courthouse lobby at 8:30, the building already filling with the day's litigation, divorces and custody battles and criminal proceedings, machinery of justice, grinding through human conflict with bureaucratic efficiency. Cook County Family Court occupied courtrooms designed for function rather than grandeur spaces where life-altering decisions happened in rooms that could have been corporate conference facilities. Judge Patricia Morrison presided from a bench, elevating her above proceedings both literally and symbolically, her black robe and silver hair lending gravitas to a woman whose reputation suggested fairness tempered by intolerance for manipulation. Victoria sat at the opposing table with Robert Sterling and 2 associates. Her navy suit and minimal jewelry projecting competence and seriousness. She glanced at Dom once when he entered, expression flickering through something that might have been regret before settling into professional neutrality. Preston Whitmore sat in the gallery behind her Brooks Brothers suit and Harvard Law class ring, announcing his social position. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison. The bailiff's announcement pulled the courtroom to its feet. Judge Morrison entered with brisk efficiency, settling into her chair and reviewing the file. This is a preliminary hearing in the matter of Ashford versus Callahan regarding custody of the minor child Emma Rose Callahan, age 7. Mr. Sterling, you may proceed. Robert Sterling stood with fluid grace of someone who'd performed this action thousands of times. Your Honor, my client, Ms. Victoria Ashford, seeks modification of the current custody arrangement. We believe the evidence will demonstrate that the child's best interests are served by granting primary custody to Ms. Ashford with reasonable visitation for Mr. Callahan. Judge Morrison made a notation. This court notes that Mr. Callahan has had sole custody for 3 years. Any modification request bears a significant burden of proof. You may call your first witness. The defense calls Victoria Ashford. Victoria took the witness stand with measured steps, was sworn in, settled into the chair with perfect posture. She wore professional achievement wrapped in maternal concern. Ms. Ashford, tell the court about your relationship with Emma. Robert's opening question was softball by design. I love Emma very much. Victoria's voice carried just the right note of emotion without tipping into theatricality. She's the most important person in my life. When Dominic and I divorced, I thought I was making the right choice letting him have primary custody. I was traveling constantly and Emma needed stability. A pause for effect, but I realize now that I made a terrible mistake. I missed 3 years of my daughter's life. I can't get that time back, but I want to be present for everything that remains. Describe your current circumstances. Victoria recited advantages with precision of a quarterly earnings report. Annual income, $420,000. 4-bedroom house, Lincoln Park, purchased for $2.8 million. College fund established with $150,000 deposited. Engagement to Preston Whitmore, providing stable 2-parent household. Reduced international travel from 15 days monthly to 5. Private school enrollment ready at Latin School of Chicago. Tuition $35,000 annually. The list continued, each item another brick in a wall of material advantage. What concerns do you have about Emma's current living situation? Victoria's expression suggested pain at having to articulate these observations. Dominic lives in an 850-square-foot studio apartment in Pilsen. Emma sleeps on a sofa bed that converts each morning. The bathroom has a curtain instead of a door. The building has documented safety concerns. I've witnessed drug activity in the lobby. Emma deserves her own bedroom, her own space. Privacy as she approaches adolescence. Judge Morrison interrupted with a question that made Robert's shoulders tense fractionally. Ms. Ashford, how many times have you visited this apartment? Twice. Victoria's admission came reluctantly. Once shortly after separation and once 2 months ago. And in 3 years, how many times have you seen Emma? Victoria swallowed visibly. Approximately 11 times. Work commitments made regular visits difficult, but I'm restructuring my responsibilities to prioritize Emma. Judge Morrison made a lengthy notation before gesturing for Robert to continue. Ms. Ashford, what opportunities can you provide that Mr. Callahan cannot? Everything a child needs to thrive. Victoria leaned forward slightly. Private education with individualized attention. Music instruction with Chicago Symphony professionals. I've already inquired about piano and violin lessons. Language tutoring in Mandarin and French to prepare her for a global economy. Summer enrichment programs including space camp in Alabama since Emma loves astronomy. Her voice dropped to something more intimate. Most importantly, time. I'm home now. I can be the mother Emma deserves. Robert concluded with a question designed to preempt Rachel's obvious counter-argument. Do you believe Mr. Callahan loves Emma? Absolutely. Victoria's agreement came without hesitation. Dominic is a good man who loves our daughter, but love isn't enough when you're working 80 hours weekly and barely affording rent. Emma shouldn't grow up worrying about money, or whether Papa can pay for lunch, or if the heat will work through winter. I can eliminate those stresses and provide security she deserves. No further questions. Robert returned to his seat with satisfaction of someone who'd established a strong foundation. Rachel stood with deliberate slowness, buttoning her jacket. The movement suggested a predator preparing to strike. Ms. Ashford, you testified that you made a terrible mistake 3 years ago. When exactly did you realize this? Victoria's composure flickered. Gradually, over the past year, I've been reflecting on priorities and… Gradually. Rachel repeated the word as if tasting it for hidden meanings. Yet you filed this custody petition 3 weeks ago, approximately 6 weeks after your engagement to Preston Whitmore was announced in the Chicago Tribune Society pages. Her tone remained professionally neutral while implying everything. Is it coincidence that your desire for custody coincided with your fiancé's announced intention to run for Illinois State Senate? Robert rose halfway. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is speculating about motivation. Judge Morrison considered before responding. Overruled. Motivation is relevant to best interest analysis. Answer the question, Ms. Ashford. Preston's political ambitions have nothing to do with my love for Emma. Victoria's defense sounded hollow even as she articulated it. We want to provide a stable family environment, for whose benefit Rachel's interruption was surgical. Emma's or Preston's campaign image. Family values play well with voters, don't they? That's not fair. Victoria's professional mask cracked slightly. You're twisting. I'm asking questions about timing, Ms. Ashford. Rachel produced a document. This is a timeline of your visits with Emma over 3 years, 11 visits totaling approximately 9 hours and 43 minutes. That's less time than most people spend at work in a single day. She handed copies to Judge Morrison and Robert. Your longest visit was 1 hour and 37 minutes. Your shortest was 22 minutes because you had a conference call with Tokyo. On Emma's 6th birthday, you arrived 47 minutes late and left after 53 minutes for a work emergency. Do these facts accurately represent your involvement? Yes, but context matters. Victoria's voice strained with effort of maintaining composure. My work required… Your work required travel. Rachel's interruption cut cleanly. Yet Mr. Callahan also works demanding hours and managed to be present for Emma consistently. The difference isn't opportunity, Ms. Ashford, it's priority. You prioritized career advancement over parental involvement. Now that being a mother serves your fiancé's political interests, suddenly, Emma becomes a priority. Is that accurate? I want to make things right. Victoria's defense collapsed into something more genuine, tears beginning to form. I know I failed Emma. I'm trying to make amends by taking her from the only stable parent she's known. Rachel's voice softened slightly, making the words more devastating. Ms. Ashford, can you tell me Emma's best friend's name? The silence stretched painfully before Victoria admitted defeat. No. Lily Patterson. Rachel supplied the information. They've been inseparable since kindergarten. Emma talks about Lily constantly. You would know this if you'd been present for everyday conversations. What's Emma's teacher's name, Mrs. Patterson? Victoria offered tentatively. Correct, but only because Emma mentioned it at her birthday party 2 months ago, the party you attended for 47 minutes. Can you explain why Emma loves mathematics? Because she's good at it. Victoria's response came out as a question. Rachel produced a journal entry on school letterhead. This is from Emma's class journal. The teacher asked students to write about their favorite subject. Emma wrote, and I quote, I love math because numbers have patterns and patterns are like rules. Rules don't change even when people leave. Numbers make sense when everything else doesn't. She looked at Victoria directly. Do you understand what your daughter is telling us? Victoria's tears spilled over mascara, beginning to track down carefully made-up cheeks. She feels abandoned. She feels like the only constant in her life is mathematical principles. Rachel's voice carried weight without cruelty. Because the person who should have been constant, you wasn't there. Can you name 3 things Emma fears? The dark, Victoria offered weakly. Darkness when her nightlight is positioned more than 12 inches from her bed, Rachel corrected. She also fears thunderstorms because they remind her of the night you left. There was a significant storm that evening. And she fears disappointing people because she's internalized the belief that if she's not perfect, people abandon her. Like you did, Mr. Callahan knows these fears intimately because he's there when Emma wakes at 2 a.m., crying. "Where were you, Ms. Ashford?" "Building a career." The words came out broken. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought financial security mattered more than being present. Rachel completed the sentence. "Your Honor, I have no further questions for this witness." Victoria stepped down with trembling legs, Preston rising to support her. Judge Morrison called a 15-minute recess. Dom found himself in the hallway with Rachel, both of them silent as reality of what had just occurred settled like fallout. That was brutal. Dom's observation was both appreciation and concern. That was necessary. Rachel's response carried no apology. Victoria needed to understand that wealth doesn't substitute for knowledge. The judge needed to see that Victoria's custody request is built on resources rather than relationship. When they returned, Rachel called Dom to the stand. He walked forward on legs that felt disconnected, was sworn in with a hand that trembled slightly, sat facing a room full of people whose opinions would determine his future. Judge Morrison regarded him with an expression that revealed nothing. "Mr. Callahan, describe your typical day with Emma." Dom took a breath and began talking, his voice steadying as he moved through familiar territory. 5 a.m. wake-up without disturbing her. 6 a.m. gentle wake-up call with promises of pancakes. 7:30 bus ride holding hands. 3:15 pickup every single day without exception. 6 p.m. dinner together while she did homework. 7:30 bedtime ritual unchanged for 5 years. 3 stories in specific order. 1 about space, 1 about animals, 1 funny. Why 3 stories specifically? Because 3 is Emma's number. Dom's explanation came from deep understanding. She needs the pattern. Fewer than 3 and she feels incomplete. More than 3 and she uses it to procrastinate. 3 is the exact amount that satisfies her need for routine while providing closure. I learned this through 2 years of trial and error. 3 is her magic number, and knowing that is part of knowing her. Tell the court about Mr. Buttons. Dom felt his chest tighten with emotion threatening to overwhelm control. Mr. Buttons is Emma's elephant. She's had him since she was 2 months old, originally tan-colored, now gray from being washed so many times. His left eye is loose because the thread has worn through, but Emma won't let me repair it properly because she says it's part of his personality. His voice roughened despite efforts to keep it steady. When Emma is worried about something but doesn't want to talk about it, she ties Mr. Button's trunk in a knot. That's my signal. When I see his trunk knotted, I know to ask gentle questions and wait patiently. She'll open up when she's ready. You can't force these conversations. You have to understand your child deeply enough to read the signals she sends. How did you learn this behavior pattern? By being there, every night for 5 years. Dom looked directly at Judge Morrison. There's no shortcut to understanding your child. You have to be present, observe, listen, learn. It takes time, real time, not quality time scheduled between business trips. It takes attention and patience and thousands of small interactions that accumulate into deep knowledge. Ms. Ashford testified that you work too much and struggle financially. Why should Emma remain with you given those challenges? Dom had prepared this answer for days, but in the moment, it came from somewhere deeper than practice. Your Honor, 3 years ago, when Victoria left, I was terrified. Terrified I wasn't good enough, rich enough, educated enough. Every night I questioned whether I was failing her by not providing more. His voice strengthened. But every night when I read those 3 stories, Emma looks at me with complete trust. She doesn't care that we live in a studio apartment or that I can't afford private school. She cares that when she's scared, I'm there in 30 seconds. When she's sad, I know why without her explaining. When she's happy, I'm the first person she wants to share it with. He paused. Money can buy tutors and music lessons and summer camps, but it can't buy knowing when your child ties an elephant's trunk because she's worried. Money can hire therapists, but it can't replace a parent who's there at 2 a.m. during nightmares, who understands without words, who loves unconditionally. His eyes met Judge Morrison's directly. I'm asking if absolute certainty that her father will always be there, never leaving, never choosing something else over her, is worth more than a bigger house. Because that's what I give Emma every single day. The courtroom was completely silent when Dom finished. Judge Morrison was writing extensive notes. Victoria was crying into her hands. Rachel remained standing, letting the moment settle. Mr. Callahan, what does Emma need most? Me. Dom's answer came without hesitation. Not my money, or my opportunities, or my material provisions. She needs me present and consistent and reliable. She needs to know that no matter what happens, Papa will be there. That's what I give her. That's what money can't buy. No further questions. Robert Sterling approached for cross-examination with visible reluctance. Mr. Callahan, you have health insurance through a state program. What happens if you become seriously ill? I'll find a way. The answer was honest rather than confident. I always have. That's hope, not a plan. Robert pressed on, perceived weakness. What if Emma needed emergency medical care beyond what your insurance covers? I'd work extra hours, take out a loan, sell everything I own. Dom's voice carried absolute conviction, whatever it took to keep her safe. But you don't have a financial cushion, no savings for emergencies. Having money doesn't make you a good parent. Dom's response emerged from something deeper than prepared answers. Not having money doesn't make you a bad one. What makes me a good father is showing up every day regardless of circumstances. Emma knows I will never abandon her, never prioritize anything over her well-being, never let financial stress change how much I love her. That security is worth more than any bank account. Robert recognized defeat when he encountered it. No further questions. Rachel called Mrs. Brennan next, the elderly woman taking the stand with dignity. She testified about the Christmas telescope with details painting Dom's exhaustion and determination in stark relief. He worked double shifts for 2 months. I watched him come home some mornings barely able to walk, but he still made Emma breakfast and ensured she got to school safely before collapsing. Christmas morning, when Emma opened that telescope, Dominic didn't admire the equipment. He watched his daughter's face light up. He was proud of her happiness, not of what he'd provided. That's the difference between giving things and giving yourself. Robert's cross-examination focused on her age. Mrs. Brennan, you're 82 years old. Are you physically capable of responding to a medical emergency? The steel in her response suggested decades of managing far more challenging situations. I taught high school for 40 years. I've handled student fights, medical emergencies, parents threatening legal action. I know Emma's complete medical history, her allergies, her doctor's name, her emergency contacts. I'm old, Mr. Sterling, not incompetent. Don't confuse the two. Ms. Patterson followed with professional testimony about Emma's academic excellence and behavioral adjustment. She's one of my best students. Bright, curious, well-socialized. No signs of neglect or emotional distress. Mr. Callahan is the most involved parent in my class. Frank Morrison completed witness testimony with military precision, describing the snow day when Dom brought Emma to work rather than leaving her unsupervised. She sat quietly for 7 hours doing homework. Most 7-year-olds would have been disruptive, but Emma understood her papa was working, and she needed to be responsible. That's exceptional parenting, producing an exceptionally well-adjusted child. Robert's closing argument hit practical points. Your Honor, no one disputes that Mr. Callahan loves Emma, but this court must consider practical realities: financial instability, inadequate living conditions, exhausting work schedule. These factors impact a child's development regardless of parental love. Ms. Ashford can provide everything Emma needs. We ask the court to grant custody modification so Emma can have the life she deserves. Rachel stood for her closing with controlled passion. Your Honor, Mr. Sterling is correct that this case is about what Emma deserves, but he's fundamentally wrong about what that means. Emma doesn't need a 4-bedroom house. She needs a parent who knows to check Mr. Button's trunk for knots signaling worry. She doesn't need private tutors. She needs a parent present for homework every night. She doesn't need European summer programs. She needs a parent who's there at 2 a.m. during nightmares about abandonment. Her voice strengthened. If this court rules based on bank accounts, we send a message to every working-class parent. You're not wealthy enough to deserve your children. That's not justice. That's economic discrimination. Dominic Callahan may not be rich, but he's present. And presence is what Emma needs most. Judge Morrison called for a brief recess before delivering her decision, 15 minutes that felt like hours compressed into anxiety so intense it became almost physical. When they returned, Judge Morrison had arranged her notes. "This is among the most challenging cases I've encountered," Judge Morrison began. "Both parties clearly love Emma, but as counsel correctly noted, love alone is insufficient to determine custody. This court must examine evidence and apply legal standards designed to serve the child's best interests." She paused, consulting notes. "Ms. Ashford presents substantial advantages, financial resources, educational opportunities, stable, two-parent household. These are not insignificant considerations. However, 3 years of virtual absence cannot be erased by future intentions, no matter how sincere. The court notes Ms. Ashford's inability to answer basic questions about Emma's daily life, her emotional needs, her fears and preferences." Dom's hands gripped the armrests as Judge Morrison continued. "Mr. Callahan presents significant challenges, limited financial resources, demanding work schedule, modest living conditions. Under different circumstances, these factors might warrant serious concern. However, the evidence demonstrates that Emma's needs are being met adequately. She excels academically, shows no signs of neglect or emotional distress, and has formed a secure attachment to her father. Most compelling is Mr. Callahan's detailed knowledge of Emma's emotional landscape, the specific fears, the behavioral signals, the routines that provide security. Therefore, the court finds that Emma's best interests are served by maintaining current custody arrangements. Ms. Ashford's petition for custody modification is denied. Dominic Callahan retains full legal and physical custody of Emma Rose Callahan." Her gavel fell with a sound that seemed to echo through Dom's entire body. "However," Judge Morrison's voice cut through Dom's euphoria with precision. "The court has concerns about the living situation. While Mr. Callahan has demonstrated excellent parenting, the studio apartment is inadequate for a developing child's needs, particularly as Emma approaches adolescence. This court will review the situation in 6 months. Mr. Callahan is advised to seek improved housing. Ms. Ashford is granted supervised visitation every other weekend contingent upon completion of a reunification program, including parenting education and family therapy." Dom barely heard the additional conditions, focused entirely on the central fact: Emma was staying with him. Against lawyers and money and a system designed to favor people like Victoria, he'd won because he knew how to read his daughter's signals. Because 3 bedtime stories mattered more than private school tuition. Because presence counted for more than presence. Outside the courthouse, Eleanor Hutchinson waited by her limousine with patience of someone accustomed to having others adjust schedules. "Congratulations, Dominic. Justice was served today. Thank you for everything." Dom's gratitude was inadequate to the magnitude of what she'd enabled. "Without you connecting me with Rachel." "You won because you deserved to win," Eleanor interrupted with firmness of someone rejecting false modesty. "Rachel presented your case effectively, but you provided the evidence. 3 years of documentation of showing up, of knowing Emma deeply enough to prove that relationship matters more than resources." She paused. "Now we need to discuss the judge's warning about your living situation. I'll figure something out." Dom heard defensive exhaustion in his own voice. "I have a better solution." Eleanor produced a business card. "Monday at noon, meet me for lunch. I'm offering you a position at Hutchinson Industries. Facilities Operations Manager. $68,000 annually, plus full benefits, health insurance, 401k, matching 3 weeks paid vacation. Normal business hours, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. No more night shifts. The numbers made no sense, too large to process. I don't have a college degree. Why would you? Because you notice details others miss. Because you take initiative when problems arise. Because you've demonstrated integrity repeatedly when no one important was watching. Eleanor's assessment was clinical. I need someone managing my facilities who actually cares about quality and security. You've proven you're that person. She held up a hand. This isn't charity, Dominic. It's a job offer based on merit. Accept it or don't, but understand that I wouldn't extend the offer if I didn't believe you'd excel. What's the catch? You finish your engineering degree. Eleanor's smile suggested this had never been negotiable. 2 semesters remaining. Company pays tuition through our education reimbursement program. You take 1 class per semester while working. 2 years to completion. Non-negotiable condition of employment. I have Emma. I can't. You've been working 80 hours weekly. Eleanor's interruption was matter of fact. 45 hours plus 1 evening class is significantly less demanding. You'll have more time with Emma, not less. Think about it over the weekend. Monday, we discuss details. Rachel emerged from the courthouse looking professionally satisfied. You were excellent today. Emma's staying with you because you proved that knowledge and presence matter more than resources. Because you destroyed Victoria's case. I presented facts and let them speak. Rachel's professional modesty didn't quite conceal satisfaction. Victoria destroyed her own case by being unable to answer basic questions. All I did was make that ignorance obvious. Mrs. Brennan's apartment smelled like vanilla cookies and chamomile tea when Dom arrived to collect Emma. Emma was at the kitchen table drawing pictures of Saturn tongue poking out slightly in concentration. She looked up when the door opened, eyes searching his face. Papa, did you go to the important meeting? Dom knelt to Emma's level, pulling her into a hug that was more for his reassurance than hers. We won, sweetheart. You're staying with me. Forever and always. I told Lily we would win. Emma's confidence had never wavered. I knew Papa would make everything okay. Mrs. Brennan pressed a container of cookies into Dom's hands, along with unspoken understanding that some victories deserved celebration even when words were inadequate. That evening, Dom and Emma followed their established routine with heightened appreciation for the ordinary miracle of normalcy. Dinner at 6. Homework help at the kitchen table. Bath at 7 while Dom waited outside the curtain. 3 bedtime stories that Emma selected with careful deliberation. But when Dom finished the 3rd story and began the goodnight ritual, Emma's hand caught his sleeve. Papa, the kids at school were wrong. Money isn't more important than love. Her observation carried wisdom of someone who'd lived through proof. You're my papa, and that's what matters. Dom kissed her forehead, his chest tight with emotion. 3 years of single fatherhood still couldn't fully accommodate. Love you to the moon and back, Emma Rose. Love you to Saturn's rings and back, Papa. Emma's return phrase completed their ritual. Mr. Buttons lay beside her trunk, loose and unthreatening. After Emma slept, Dom sat at the kitchen table with Eleanor's business card and the weight of decisions that would reshape their lives. $68,000, health insurance, normal hours, the possibility of picking Emma up every afternoon, of being present for dinner every evening, of not working himself into exhaustion for survival that always felt one emergency away from collapse. Judge Morrison's warning wasn't subtle. The court expected visible progress within 6 months. He pulled out his laptop and searched for University of Illinois extension courses, engineering fundamentals, calculus, physics. Subjects he'd loved before Emma was born and Victoria left, and survival became more important than education. 2 semesters, 1 class at a time. It felt impossible and necessary simultaneously. Dom looked around the studio apartment Judge Morrison had found inadequate. 850 square feet containing everything Emma knew as home. It wasn't enough. The court had said so explicitly. But it had been enough to keep Emma safe and loved and secure for 3 years. Now he had the chance to make it more than adequate to provide improved housing and opportunities that would satisfy Judge Morrison's 6-month review while maintaining the presence and knowledge that had won the custody battle. His phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Congratulations again. You earned this." Another text arrived immediately after from Eleanor, Monday noon, Capitol Grill. "Don't be late. We have your future to discuss." Dom set the phone down and walked to where Emma slept, her breathing steady and peaceful. Mr. Buttons lay in the crook of her arm, his trunk relaxed. 3 years ago, Dom had been terrified of failing this child. Today he'd proven to a judge, to lawyers, to Victoria, that presence mattered more than bank accounts. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Eleanor's job offer with its attendant expectations, the return to education after years away, the pressure of Judge Morrison's 6-month review. But tonight, Dom let himself feel the victory without qualification. Emma was his. The court had said so. Money hadn't won. Love had, and that was worth everything. Monday's lunch at the Capitol Grill arrived with the weight of opportunity that could either elevate or crush. Dom arrived 15 minutes early, wearing the goodwill suit that had served him through court, suddenly conscious that the restaurant's leather booths and white tablecloths represented a world where his monthly rent wouldn't cover a business dinner for 4. Eleanor was already seated reviewing something on her tablet, with the focus of someone for whom time was currency more valuable than the assets her company managed. "Sit." Her instruction carried the efficiency of someone accustomed to controlling conversations through brevity. The waiter materialized with menus. Eleanor ordered without consulting hers. Dom selected the least expensive item he could identify, still wincing internally at the cost. "Let's discuss your future without wasting time on false modesty or excessive gratitude." Eleanor's directness was refreshing after years of navigating the elaborate courtesy poverty demanded. "You've demonstrated skills I need: attention to detail, initiative, integrity." Facilities. Operations manager oversees all building operations for our tower. Maintenance, security, vendor relationships. Safety protocols. 60 floors require coordination. Most people can't manage without letting things slip through cracks. You've proven you don't let things slip. What exactly does $68,000 buy you that my current performance doesn't already provide? Dom's question came from exhaustion, with accepting things without understanding their true cost. Eleanor's slight smile suggested approval. "Someone who reports directly to me rather than through 3 management layers. Someone invested in excellence rather than just completing shifts. Someone who'll finish their engineering degree and bring technical knowledge to facilities management instead of just following protocols they don't understand." Her tablet screen showed an offer letter already prepared. Health insurance covers Emma fully. Dental, vision, prescription coverage. 401k with 6% company match. 3 weeks PTO. Start date 2 weeks from today. The engineering degree requirement feels like setting me up to fail. Dom's honesty came from exhaustion with pretending competence he didn't possess. "I dropped out 7 years ago. Going back means proving I can handle material I've forgotten while managing a new job and raising Emma." "You worked 80 hours weekly for 3 years without failing Emma." Eleanor's response was immediate. 45 hours of employment plus 6 hours of weekly coursework is objectively less demanding. The question isn't capability, it's whether you believe you deserve the opportunity. The phrasing struck deeper than professional negotiation, excavating assumptions Dom had carried so long they felt like structural foundation rather than learned helplessness. "Why does it matter to you whether I finish a degree?" "Because potential wasted is a tragedy I refuse to enable." Eleanor's intensity suggested this touched something personal beneath her professional exterior. "I've built this company by recognizing talent others overlook because it arrives in packaging they don't value. You're smart, capable, and reliable. The only thing preventing you from roles far beyond facilities management is a piece of paper saying you completed formal education. Get that paper, then we discuss what comes next." The offer letter waited on the table between them like a door opening onto futures Dom hadn't allowed himself to imagine. "I accept." The words came out firmer than he felt. When do I start 2 weeks from today? Eleanor retrieved the offer letter, producing a pen. Sign here, initial there. Your supervisor will be me directly for the first 6 months. After that, you'll have more autonomy. She paused. I don't tolerate mediocrity, Dominic. I'm investing in you because I believe you'll excel. Prove me wrong and I'll terminate you without hesitation. Prove me right, and opportunities extend far beyond this initial role. The honesty was more reassuring than encouragement would have been. Eleanor's expectations, creating clear parameters. Dom signed with handwriting that trembled slightly, committing to a future that required him to be more than he'd proven capable of being. 2 weeks later, Dom arrived at Hutchinson Industries through the main entrance rather than the service door, the shift in perspective making the lobby feel unfamiliar despite hundreds of overnight shifts. Security issued him a badge with his photograph and the title that still felt borrowed: Facilities Operations Manager. The 15th floor housed facilities management in offices functional rather than impressive. Eleanor met him at 7:30. Today you begin proving that character matters more than credentials. Her greeting contained no warmth but also no doubt. The team you're managing has 15 members. Most have been here longer than you've been alive. Some will resent reporting to someone they knew as cleaning staff. Your job is to earn their respect through competence, not demand it through authority. The morning meeting assembled in a conference room that smelled like coffee, and the particular anxiety of employees uncertain whether new management meant improved conditions or increased scrutiny. Dom recognized faces from his overnight shifts, maintenance techs and security coordinators who'd nodded acknowledgement when he'd emptied their trash cans. Now, he stood at the front while Eleanor performed introductions, emphasizing his 2 years of documented excellence without mentioning his previous role explicitly. One face radiated hostility so intense it was almost physical. Brian Carter sat in the back corner, arms crossed over a chest that had probably been impressive in his 30s, but had softened into middle-aged thickness. His expression broadcast resentment and contempt in equal measure, the look of someone who'd been promised something earned only to watch it given to an interloper who'd cut ahead in line. Eleanor concluded with characteristic bluntness. I expect full cooperation. Mr. Callahan earned this position through demonstrated excellence. Those who can't adjust to new management should begin seeking employment elsewhere. She left without further ceremony, creating space for the dynamic she'd deliberately established. The meeting proceeded with awkward formalities, staff introducing themselves with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Brian's turn came last, his voice carrying just enough edge to signal insubordination without crossing into actionable territory. Brian Carter, 12 years facilities experience. Was acting manager before he paused meaningfully. Circumstances changed. Looking forward to learning from our new leadership. The sarcasm was subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability while making his position unmistakably clear. Dom's office was 15C, a space barely larger than his studio apartment's kitchen, but possessing actual walls and a door. His first assignment from Eleanor waited in his email: review all maintenance schedules and identify inefficiencies. Report Friday with recommendations. 5 days to prove he could do the job with a man who hated him waiting for any mistake. The afternoon was consumed by systems analysis, revealing just how much he didn't know about coordinating 60 floors of building operations. HVAC schedules requiring understanding of mechanical engineering principles he'd only partially learned 7 years ago. Security protocols referencing technologies invented since he'd dropped out. Vendor contracts with terms he had to look up. By 5 o'clock, his head ached with accumulated information that hadn't yet organized into comprehensible patterns. Emma was waiting at Mrs. Brennan's when Dom arrived at 5:45, the first time in 3 years he'd picked her up at a reasonable hour, rather than desperate apology for being late. Papa, you're not tired. Her observation carried delight. Your eyes aren't doing that squinty thing. The absence of bone-deep fatigue felt strange, his body uncertain how to interpret finishing work with energy remaining. We have time before dinner. Want to go to the park? Emma's face lit up with joy disproportionate to such a modest offer, the reaction making Dom's chest constrict with guilt about how rarely he'd had capacity for spontaneous activities. That evening's routine felt different despite following familiar patterns. Dinner at 6:30 rather than rushing through whatever could be prepared fastest. Homework with Dom actually alert enough to help with fraction problems. 3 stories delivered with enthusiasm rather than exhaustion. After Emma slept, Dom opened his laptop and navigated to University of Illinois extension courses. Engineering fundamentals started in 3 weeks, meeting Tuesday evenings from 6 to 9. He registered before doubt could transform possibility into excuse, the commitment feeling simultaneously reckless and necessary. The rest of the week followed similar patterns, Dom arriving early and staying late to absorb information faster than the job demanded. He introduced himself to each team member individually, learning responsibilities and listening to complaints about inefficient procedures previous management had ignored. Most warmed to his genuine interest. Brian remained coldly professional interactions, maintaining minimum courtesy while broadcasting maximum resentment. Friday morning, Dom submitted his efficiency report to Eleanor recommendations supported by staff input and analysis of historical maintenance data. Eleanor reviewed it during their afternoon meeting. "This is solid work. Where did you learn to analyze operational data this way?" "Necessity." Dom's answer was honest. 2 years of overnight shifts taught me where systems fail. I noticed patterns. The report just documents what I already knew from experience. Most people with this knowledge wouldn't know how to present it effectively. Eleanor's approval was evident. "You've identified 4 legitimate inefficiencies that will save approximately $200,000 annually when implemented." She closed the document. "Your first month's performance will determine whether this continues successfully or ends poorly. Brian Carter is actively undermining you. I'm aware. How you handle it reveals whether you can manage people as well as systems." The warning was clear. Eleanor wouldn't intervene, expecting Dom to navigate interpersonal challenges without requiring executive protection. Brian's sabotage began subtly during Dom's second week, small acts of insubordination, carefully calibrated to disrupt without creating evidence Eleanor would consider actionable. Emails excluding Dom from critical vendor communications. Maintenance requests submitted without his approval despite protocol requiring management sign-off. Rumors spreading that Dom had received the position through Eleanor's charity implications about exactly what kind of relationship might motivate a CEO to personally invest in a janitor's career advancement. Dom documented everything while trying to address concerns professionally. "I notice you've been submitting work orders without routing them through me first. We need to follow protocol." Brian's response came with barely concealed contempt. "Sorry, boss. Forgot you're new to how things work around here. Sometimes urgent repairs can't wait for approval from management that doesn't understand our systems yet." The condescension was designed to provoke reaction that would justify Brian's assessment of Dom as unqualified. Dom swallowed his anger and responded with forced calm. "Going forward, route everything through me. If something's genuinely urgent, call my cell. But nothing moves forward without my sign-off. That's not negotiable." Brian's smile suggested anticipation of future opportunities for more effective sabotage. "Sure thing, whatever you say." Week 3 brought the incident that nearly ended Dom's management career before it properly began. Brian approached with what appeared to be a legitimate solution to a persistent problem. "We've been having issues with electrical maintenance on floors 15 through 30. Current vendor is slow and expensive. I found an alternative, Riverside Electrical Services. 20% cost reduction and faster response times." He provided documentation that looked professional. "I've worked with them before. Good people. But you're the manager, so it's your call." The trap was sophisticated. Brian positioning himself as helpful while ensuring any failure would land squarely on Dom's shoulders. Dom reviewed Riverside's credentials, which appeared legitimate, proper licensing insurance documentation reference list, including recognizable commercial properties and His mistake was trusting Brian's endorsement rather than conducting independent verification. Approve the contract. Dom's decision felt like extending an olive branch. Riverside began work Tuesday afternoon, their crew accessing electrical systems to perform routine maintenance. At 2:15, the building's power failed completely, all 60 floors going dark simultaneously. Emergency lighting flickered on while backup generators struggled. Elevators stopped between floors, trapping employees. Server rooms began overheating as cooling systems went offline. Dom was on the 32nd floor when the lights died, his stomach dropping as he understood immediately what had happened and whose fault it was. He ran to the stairwell, taking steps 2 at a time while calling building security. "Get Riverside's crew out of the electrical systems now." The descent from 32 floors felt endless, his lungs burning by the time he reached the 15th floor where Riverside's crew was packing equipment with urgent haste of people who understood they'd caused catastrophic failure. The scope of the disaster became clear over the next 4 hours as power was gradually restored, floor by floor. Riverside had installed substandard components that couldn't handle the electrical load, their work creating a cascade failure that propagated through the entire system. The building was evacuated, 2,000 employees sent home while engineers assessed damage and media crews gathered outside. Estimated losses included 4 hours of lost productivity, potential server damage in the millions, and reputational harm to a firm whose reliability was fundamental to client confidence. Eleanor summoned Dom to her office at 6 o'clock, the executive floor powered by backup generators casting everything in harsh emergency lighting. Her expression was carved from granite fury held in check by professional discipline that made her more terrifying than if she'd simply yelled. "Explain what happened." "The vendor I approved installed inadequate components." Dom's voice was steady despite his hands shaking. "Riverside Electrical Services. They provided credentials that appeared legitimate but were apparently forged. The vendor you approved without proper verification." Eleanor's correction was surgical, against company protocol that requires independent background checks before any new vendor accesses critical systems. Her computer screen showed the protocol Dom had signed during orientation. "Do you understand what this cost us?" Dom's throat was too tight for speech, but Eleanor continued without waiting. $400,000 in immediate losses, additional exposure for potential server damage, media coverage questioning our operational competence, client confidence undermined right before we negotiate contracts worth hundreds of millions. Her voice dropped to something colder than anger. "I hired you because I believed your judgment was sound. Today you proved that belief wrong. I trusted Brian when he said he'd worked with them before." The excuse sounded pathetic, even as Dom articulated it. "Brian set a trap." Eleanor's interruption was brutal. "And you walked into it without verifying anything independently because you wanted to believe he was cooperating. That's not judgment, Dominic. That's naivety that cost my company nearly $500,000 in a single afternoon. I'll resign." "I don't want your resignation." Eleanor's response surprised him. "I want you to learn from catastrophic failure so it never happens again. You made a mistake, a big one, but the alternative is firing you and hiring someone else who hasn't learned this lesson yet." She leaned forward. "This is your final warning. One more error of this magnitude and you're done. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am. Fix this." Eleanor's dismissal was absolute. "Find out how Brian obtained forged credentials. Document everything. If he committed fraud, I want evidence sufficient for criminal prosecution." Dom left her office feeling like he'd been physically beaten. Brian was waiting in the hallway, expression carefully neutral in a way that broadcast satisfaction. "Rough day, boss. Guess those credentials weren't as solid as they looked." "You set me up." Dom's accusation was quiet enough not to carry. "Prove it." Brian's smile was subtle and vicious. "You approved the vendor. You signed off on everything. Nobody forced you to trust me." His voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't belong here, janitor. This job was mine. You stole it through connections. So I'm taking it back by proving you can't handle responsibilities that require actual competence. Whatever you're planning next, I'll be watching. Dom studied Brian's face. You won't catch me again. Brian laughed quietly as he walked away. We'll see. That evening, Dom picked Emma up with barely enough energy to walk the stairs. Mrs. Brennan took one look at his face and pulled him into a hug that smelled like lavender. Whatever happened today, you'll survive it. Papa, are you okay? Emma's concern was visible in the knot she'd tied in Mr. Button's trunk. You look sad. Papa made a big mistake at work today. Dom's honesty with Emma had always been calibrated to avoid burdening her with adult problems while respecting her intelligence. I trusted someone I shouldn't have trusted, and it caused problems. But I'm fixing it. Everyone makes mistakes. Emma's philosophy came from lessons Dom had taught. You taught me that. What matters is learning and trying again. The wisdom emerging from his 7-year-old daughter would have been amusing if it weren't so perfectly suited to his situation. You're right, sweetheart. Papa's going to try again and do better. That night, after Emma slept, Dom stayed awake reviewing security logs and vendor communications searching for evidence of Brian's involvement. If Brian had simply recommended a bad vendor, that was poor judgment on Dom's part. But if Brian had actively participated in creating forged credentials or received payment from Riverside that crossed into criminal fraud, Eleanor could prosecute. The breakthrough came at 2 in the morning when Dom noticed unusual late-night building access patterns. Brian's badge had been used to enter the server room at 2:30 a.m., 3 times over the past 2 weeks, entries that coincided with nights when sensitive data backups were running and security monitoring was lightest. The pattern made no sense. Brian's official responsibilities didn't include server room access. Dom pulled security footage from those nights, watching grainy video showing Brian entering with someone else, a man in a suit who didn't match any employee profile. The footage showed them connecting external storage devices to servers and transferring data for approximately 40 minutes. The final entry had occurred just 2 nights ago. The realization hit like ice water. Brian wasn't just sabotaging Dom's management. He was stealing corporate data, industrial espionage that could cost Hutchinson hundreds of millions if proprietary information reached competitors. The electrical failure was intended to cover Brian's tracks, creating chaos that would distract from noticing the data breach. Dom spent the next 3 hours documenting everything, cross-referencing server access logs with security footage and building a timeline showing systematic theft extending back months. By 5 a.m., Dom had assembled evidence sufficient to interest both Eleanor's legal team and likely the FBI. He waited until 7 o'clock before calling Eleanor's office. Tell her I need 15 minutes immediately. It's about yesterday's electrical failure. The urgency in his voice must have communicated effectively because the assistant called back, within 2 minutes, Mrs. Hutchinson will see you at 7:30. Eleanor's office at 7:30 was immaculate despite the early hour. This better be important. Brian Carter has been stealing corporate data. Dom stated the conclusion before presenting evidence. 3 separate instances over 2 weeks where he accessed the server room during overnight hours with an unknown individual. They connected external storage and transferred data. He displayed the security footage, the grainy video showing exactly what he'd described. Eleanor's expression shifted from irritation to laser focus. Show me everything. The presentation took 40 minutes. Dom walking through timelines and access logs and security footage documenting systematic theft. The unknown individual appeared consistent across all instances, suggesting organized operation rather than spontaneous opportunism. Eleanor called her security director and IT director to join the meeting, both arriving within 10 minutes. The briefing took another hour as they verified Dom's findings. IT discovering that the transferred data included proprietary research on battery storage technology worth approximately $200 million in development costs and potential market advantage. How did you find this? Eleanor's question carried new respect. I've been reviewing security logs since the electrical failure, trying to understand what Brian was planning. Dom's explanation was honest. I noticed access patterns that didn't make sense, so I investigated further. You caught what professional security missed. Eleanor's assessment was pointed. This is industrial espionage at a scale that interests federal prosecutors. She turned to her security director. I want facial recognition on the unknown individual. IT. I need complete forensic analysis of what was taken and where it was transferred. Legal, get me federal prosecutors by noon. The next 3 hours transformed from Dom's disaster into vindication. By 10 o'clock, facial recognition had identified the unknown individual as David Huang, an employee of Tech Corp Industries, Hutchinson's primary competitor in battery storage research. Bank records showed deposits to Brian totaling $75,000 over 3 months' payment for access and information that would have saved Tech Corp years of research and hundreds of millions in development costs. Bring him in. Eleanor's instruction to security was cold and final. Brian arrived at 10:30 with confusion, giving way to fear as he entered the conference room to find Eleanor, her legal team security director, and Dom waiting around a table covered with printed evidence. What's this about? Eleanor activated the monitor displaying security footage of Brian and David Huang in the server room. We're discussing your side business selling my company's proprietary research to Tech Corp Industries. Her voice was arctic. $75,000 in payments. 3 documented instances of unauthorized data transfer. Evidence sufficient to interest federal prosecutors who already have subpoenas prepared. Brian's face drained of color. I can explain. You can explain to federal agents. Eleanor's interruption was absolute. You're terminated immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Anything you say will be used against you in criminal proceedings. Brian's eyes found Dom as security gripped his arms. You destroyed me. The accusation was spat with venom. I gave 12 years to this company. I deserved that promotion. You stole my job. You betrayed your employer for money. Dom's response was quiet but definitive. I noticed details you thought you'd hidden. That's why Eleanor hired me, because I pay attention to things people assume no one's watching. Brian was escorted out, still protesting, his voice fading as he was removed from the building. Eleanor turned to Dom with an expression that might have been approval beneath professional reserve. You saved this company $200 million in losses and prevented competitors from gaining years of research advantage. That's excellent work. I was trying to prove I didn't deserve to be fired for yesterday's failure. Luck is preparation meeting opportunity. Eleanor's response suggested a philosophy developed over decades. You were prepared because you've spent 2 years learning this building's systems. You created opportunity by investigating thoroughly rather than accepting surface explanations. She returned to her desk, producing a document that looked official. I'm promoting you effective immediately. Director of Facilities Operations, $95,000 annually. You'll manage not just operations but also develop the processes and training programs that prevent incidents like yesterday from recurring. The promotion felt too large following yesterday's disaster. I almost cost you $500,000. And then you prevented a loss 20 times larger. Eleanor's logic was coldly practical. Net result is you've added substantial value. That's what I pay for. She extended the promotion letter. This isn't charity, Dominic. It's recognition that you've proven the judgment I believed you possessed. The following months passed in a blur of implementation. Dom developing systems that institutionalized the attention to detail he'd learned through 2 years of noticing things others missed. He created protocols for vendor verification requiring independent background checks. He established cross-training programs so multiple staff understood critical systems. He implemented security procedures that flagged unusual access patterns automatically. His evening engineering class was challenging, but manageable, the material returning more easily than expected. Emma adjusted to Papa having 1 late night weekly, Mrs. Brennan providing dinner and supervision with the reliability of someone who'd raised 3 children and taught hundreds more. Victoria's supervised visits evolved from awkward obligation to something approaching genuine relationship. 4 months of consistent attendance every other weekend, coupled with parenting classes and therapy that had forced her to confront exactly what she'd sacrificed. The woman who picked Emma up for their 8th visit looked less polished than the Victoria who'd sat across from Dom in that conference room, her designer suits replaced by jeans appropriate for park visits. Dom. Victoria's voice carried hesitation. Can we talk for a minute? They stood on the sidewalk while Emma ran ahead to Victoria's car. What's going on? I owe you an apology. Victoria's words came with difficulty. Not just for leaving, for trying to take Emma when you'd proven yourself to be an excellent father, and I'd proven myself to be mostly absent. She swallowed visibly. These past 4 months actually spending time with Emma learning who she is rather than who I thought she should be. I understand now what you've been giving her, what I threw away. You're learning. Dom's assessment was fair rather than kind. Emma notices. She told me last week that Mommy listens now instead of just talking. Victoria's laugh was short and pained, damning with faint praise, but accurate. Her expression shifted to something more serious. I want to ask something and I'll understand if you refuse. The court ordered supervised visits, but Emma's social worker thinks she's comfortable enough now for unsupervised time. Would you support that request? The question carried weight beyond logistical arrangements, asking Dom to trust that Victoria's transformation was genuine. He studied her face, searching for calculation behind apparent sincerity. If you hurt her again, I won't give you another chance. Emma's starting to trust you. Breaking that trust would do more damage than your original absence. I know. Victoria's acknowledgement carried conviction. I won't let her down again. I can't promise I'll be perfect, but I can promise I'll be present. Then I'll support unsupervised visits. Dom's decision felt risky and necessary. Emma needs both parents when both parents are trying. Thank you. Victoria's gratitude was complicated by emotions that couldn't be fully articulated. For everything. For raising her when I couldn't. For not poisoning her against me when you had every right to. For giving me the chance to learn how to be her mother. Emma came running back. Mommy, can we go to the planetarium today? They have new Mars exhibit. Victoria glanced at Dom, who nodded permission. Of course, sweetheart. I've been reading about Mars rovers so we can talk about them while we look at the exhibits. Emma's face lit up. Really? You studied about it? I wanted to understand what you love. Victoria's response was simple and devastating in its implications. Ready to go, Dom watched them drive away, Emma's animated gestures visible through the rear window. The sight triggered complex emotions. Pride in Emma's resilience, satisfaction at Victoria's genuine effort, lingering protectiveness, and surprising relief at not bearing sole responsibility for Emma's happiness. The 6-month review with Judge Morrison occurred in her chambers rather than open court, a less formal proceeding that felt more like progress check than judgment. Dom arrived with documentation showing his promotion to Director Emma's continued academic excellence and their upcoming move to a 2-bedroom apartment. Rachel attended, but let Dom present most evidence himself. Judge Morrison reviewed the materials with expressions that revealed cautious approval. Mr. Callahan, the improvement in your circumstances is significant. Employment increase from $38,000 to $95,000 annually, health insurance and benefits. Educational enrollment, housing upgrade pending. These address the concerns I articulated 6 months ago. Emma's happy and stable. And Dom's response focused on what mattered beneath material improvements. She's thriving academically and emotionally. She's building a relationship with her mother that was impossible when Victoria wasn't trying. Ms. Ashford has completed her reunification program satisfactorily. Judge Morrison consulted another file. The social worker reports positive progress. Both parties recommend transitioning to unsupervised visitation. The court approves this modification effective immediately. She looked at Dom directly. You've done excellent work, Mr. Callahan. This is exactly how the system should function when parents prioritize children's needs over ego or revenge. Custody arrangements continue as established with the modification that Ms. Ashford's visits are now unsupervised. Court retains jurisdiction for another 6 months, but I don't anticipate further hearings absent significant changes. The relief was profound, not because the outcome had been uncertain, but because Judge Morrison's approval represented official validation that Dom was succeeding at the only job that truly mattered. Outside the courthouse, Rachel offered congratulations with genuine warmth. "You've come a long way from the man who showed up at my office 9 months ago. Eleanor made it possible. Eleanor created opportunity." Rachel's correction was gentle but firm. "You did the work that transformed opportunity into achievement. Don't minimize what you've accomplished." 6 months later, the University of Illinois held its spring graduation ceremony in Assembly Hall. Dom wore the standard cap and gown that rendered everyone temporarily identical. Emma sat in the audience wearing a t-shirt she'd decorated, "My Papa is an Engineer." Mrs. Brennan occupied the seat beside Emma, her pride evident. Eleanor sat 2 rows back attending, despite presumably having better uses for a Saturday afternoon. Rachel was there too, her presence voluntary rather than professional. The ceremony was long and impersonal, hundreds of names called in alphabetical order. When Dom's turn came, Dominic Callahan, Bachelor of Science in Engineering. Emma's cheering was loud enough to carry across the arena. After the ceremony, Emma hugged Dom with fierce pride. "I'm so proud of you, Papa. You did it even though it was hard and you were tired. We did it." Dom's correction was important. "You supported me every Tuesday night when I had class. This accomplishment belongs to both of us." Victoria approached with Preston trailing slightly behind. "Dominic, this is amazing. Emma told me you were taking classes, but I didn't realize you were so close to finishing." 2 years, 1 class at a time. Dom's explanation was simple. "Eleanor made it a condition of employment, so I made it work. How's the job going? I'm being promoted again in June." Dom's news was recent. Vice President of Operations. "Eleanor's creating a new division focused on sustainability and efficiency. I'll be managing that with a team of 15. That's extraordinary." Victoria's assessment was complicated by recognition of exactly how far Dom had traveled from the man she'd left 3 years ago. "I had help." Dom's acknowledgement extended beyond politeness to real gratitude. "Eleanor took a chance. Rachel fought when I couldn't afford to fight for myself. Mrs. Brennan provided support that made everything else possible. None of this happened alone." Emma tugged at his sleeve. "Papa, can we go celebrate? Mrs. Brennan says she made a cake." The celebration was simple and perfect, gathered in Mrs. Brennan's apartment that smelled like vanilla buttercream and possibility. Emma proudly cut the cake while the adults who'd helped Dom survive and ultimately thrive watched with satisfaction. Eleanor left early, her presence more significant than its duration. That evening, after celebrations ended, Dom and Emma climbed to their apartment building's roof with the telescope that had cost 2 months of double shifts. The Chicago skyline spread before them in lights competing with stars for attention. Emma adjusted the telescope, searching for Saturn. "Papa, look. You can see the rings perfectly tonight." Dom peered through the eyepiece, the distant planet sharp against black void. "Beautiful. Papa, are we rich now?" Emma's question came with directness of someone too young to understand complexity behind simple words. "We're comfortable." Dom's answer was honest. "Not rich like Mommy and Preston, but secure. We don't worry about rent or whether the heat will work or if we can afford your lunch. That's different than being rich, but it's enough." Emma considered this wisdom. "I think we're rich anyway. We have each other and people who love us, and you finished college and Mommy's learning to be a real mommy. That's better than money rich." The assessment was so perfectly Emma practical and philosophical simultaneously that Dom felt his chest tighten. "You're absolutely right, sweetheart. We're rich in the ways that actually matter, The stars continued their eternal rotation above Chicago's glow, indifferent to human struggles that seemed cosmically insignificant but defined entire worlds for those living through them. Dom Callahan had entered a conference room 10 months ago, facing the prospect of losing his daughter to a system that favored wealth over presence. He'd emerged victorious, not because he'd learned to compete on terms that advantaged people like Victoria, but because he'd proven that character mattered more than credentials and love counted for more than money. You know what, Emma? Dom pulled his daughter close. Tomorrow we start planning your future. You want to be an astronaut. Then we figure out what that requires and make sure you get there. Because now Papa has the resources and stability to support your dreams, instead of just surviving. Emma looked up at him with eyes that reflected starlight and absolute trust. I still want to be an astronaut, but maybe also an engineer like you, building things that help people who don't have much. Is that okay? That's more than okay. Dom's response was thick with emotion. That's perfect, because the best thing I can teach you is that where you start doesn't determine where you finish. You just have to keep showing up and doing the work and believing you deserve the opportunities you create. The night air grew cold enough that Dom's jacket became inadequate. As they descended stairs that had transformed from symbol of struggle into simple part of home. Dom reflected on Eleanor's words about potential wasted being tragedy she refused to enable. His potential hadn't been wasted. It had been cultivated by someone who recognized value. Others overlooked because it arrived in packaging society had taught them to dismiss. The system hadn't changed, but Dom had navigated it successfully anyway, transforming from janitor to director through combination of Eleanor's investment and his own refusal to accept that poverty disqualified him from deserving his daughter. That victory was worth more than any salary increase or academic achievement validation, that character ultimately mattered in a world designed to suggest it didn't. The future stretched ahead with possibilities he was still learning to imagine, built on foundation of proving that being present mattered more than being wealthy. That attention to detail was worth more than prestigious credentials, that love demonstrated through actions counted for more than resources demonstrated through bank statements. And in the end, that was the only lesson that truly mattered, the one he would spend the rest of his life teaching Emma through every choice he made, every promise he kept, every moment he showed up when showing up was all he had to give.